20 million euro. The Irish Defence Forces. The same year, Ireland recognised Palestine. A minister signed the licenses, each one individually, each one with a name on it. That is not a headline from another country. That is a document. It has dates. It has signatures. And until last week, it was hidden. Ireland has built its entire international identity on one story, that it stands with the oppressed, that it knows what occupation feels like, that when the world looks away, Ireland speaks up. The Palestinian cause sits at the centre of that story. It has sat there for decades. Ireland was the first member of the European Union to call for Palestinian statehood, back in 1980. It recognised Palestine as a state in May of 2024. The Taoiseach, standing in front of cameras, used the word genocide to describe what was happening in Gaza. Those are the facts of the public version. But here is the part nobody is talking about. In 2024, the same year, the same months, the same government, the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment was approving export licenses for dual-use technology worth exactly 20 million euro. The named recipient on those licenses was not a hospital. It was not a university. It was the Israeli Defense Forces and Israel's Ministry of Defense. Every one of those licenses required a minister's individual signature. That is not a bureaucratic process that runs on autopilot. That is a decision made by a named person in a named building on a named date. 20 million euro worth of decisions. And the Irish public knew nothing about it until journalists used freedom of information legislation to pull the files. The gap between what was said and what was signed, that is what this video is about. Before we go any further, quick one. Drop the city or county you are watching from into the comments. It can be Dublin, Cork, or Kerry, or London, Boston, Sydney, or Toronto if you are watching from abroad. And tell me whether you are on a quick break or settling in. I am genuinely curious about the geography of this audience. Now, back to the documents. The technology in question is what the European Union calls dual use. Computers, networking hardware, data storage systems, cybersecurity software. Products that have legitimate civilian uses, but that also have military applications. Because of that dual nature, any export of these items from an EU country to a country outside the bloc requires an individual export license. The license application must go through a risk assessment. That assessment, under the relevant EU regulation, explicitly asks whether the destination country respects human rights and international humanitarian law. It asks about the risk that the goods will be diverted for military use. These are not optional considerations. They are built into the legal framework. And the Irish minister responsible for signing those licenses was required to weigh those factors every single time. In 2024, the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment approved licenses covering 35 million euro worth of dual-use exports to Israeli entities across the 5-year period from 2020 to 2024. 20 million euro of that total, more than half, was approved in 2024 alone. The specific end users, named in documents released under Freedom of Information, were the Israeli Defense Forces and Israel's Ministry of Defense. This is the first time Irish officials have publicly disclosed the identity of specific end users. That disclosure did not come voluntarily. The information was extracted by the currency and the Wall Street Journal through formal requests under Irish Freedom of Information legislation. The department had previously declined to name end users, citing commercial sensitivity. The commercial sensitivity exemption applied to technology exports destined for an army operating in a conflict zone that the same government had called a genocide, is a sentence that the files themselves now have to carry. Here is what an actual civil servant looking at this file would see. The legal test for refusing a dual-use export license, used by the same department in 2025 to deny all applications for Israeli exports, was available in 2024. The test was identical. The department's own refusal documents from 2025 state that there was a clear risk the items could be used to assist the commission of serious violations of international humanitarian law. That language did not appear in 2025 because the situation changed. The language appeared in 2025 because someone decided to apply the test that already existed. Sinn Féin's spokesperson on foreign affairs, Donncha O'Leary, called the revelation appalling and demanded that Minister Peter Burke explain why the practice was not stopped in 2024. Labour's Duncan Smith described himself as absolutely disgusted. Neither has received a substantive answer. Everything we have just covered, the licenses, the timeline, the legal test, the freedom of information extraction, that is only one half of the picture. The other half is Shannon Airport. Shannon Airport in County Clare has been used as a transit and refueling stop for United States military aircraft for more than 20 years. Between 2022 and 2024, nearly 2,000 United States military aircraft and civilian operators with declared munitions of war on board applied for exemptions to stop or overfly Ireland. In 2024 alone, 1,354 such applications were approved, a 13-year high. Irish authorities do not routinely inspect these aircraft. In October of 2024, the Irish government admitted, for the first time since 2006, that it had authorized a United States military aircraft carrying munitions of war to refuel at Shannon while en route to an Israeli military base. At least 45 United States military flights were tracked within 60 kilometers of Shannon Airport since January of 2024, with confirmed connections to Israel. This is the second mechanism. The dual-use licenses were Ireland's technology contribution. Shannon was Ireland's logistical contribution. Neither was disclosed in a press conference. Both were extracted through journalism. And this is precisely the detail that changes everything. The two mechanisms together are not accidents of a complex system that nobody was watching. They are individually authorized decisions. Each dual-use license was signed by a minister legally required to assess the human rights situation at the destination. Each Shannon transit was approved by a department that had received formal complaints about the flights. These were not oversights. They were choices. If this is the kind of analysis that has been missing from your feed, this channel does not stop at the headline. Subscribe. Now back to the number that closes this loop. The total volume of dual-use technology exported from Ireland to Israeli entities since October of 2023 is €97 million, across 42 licenses, approved and signed. The public position of the Irish government throughout that period was that Ireland was Palestine's closest ally in the European Union. Ireland had intervened in the International Court of Justice case taken by South Africa against Israel. Ireland had passed the Occupied Territories Bill, though without covering services, a limitation critics said gutted its practical effect. The Taoiseach had used the word genocide. The public version of this story is accurate. It is also incomplete. Here is what it means for the person watching from an armchair in Cork or Clare, or from a kitchen table in Birmingham or Boston. For those of you watching from the United Kingdom or the United States, this is worth saying directly. Ireland's position on Palestine has been one of the things Irish people abroad have been able to point to with genuine pride. The recognition of Palestinian statehood, the language coming from Dublin that other European capitals were too cautious to use. These documents ask a harder question about what was happening on the other side of that position, at the same time, in the same government. Back in Ireland, the question is simpler and more immediate. Every dual-use export license from Ireland requires a minister's signature. The gap between what was said publicly about Gaza and what was being signed in the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment is not a gap between rhetoric and bureaucracy. It is a gap between rhetoric and ministerial decisions. Specific, dated, documented, and hidden until journalists force the files out. Which is, technically, legal. Which is, technically, the problem. The two-speed Ireland, the one in the press release and the one in the export license files, has always existed in different forms. What changed in May of 2026 is that the files are now public. The end user is named, the dates are on the record, and the department's own language from 2025, clear risk of serious violations of international humanitarian law, sits in the public domain alongside the 2024 approvals that use the same legal test and reached the opposite conclusion. Minister Peter Burke has been asked to explain the discrepancy. As of the 18th of May, 2026, No substantive response has been given. Further Freedom of Information documents are still being processed, including files that may name the Irish companies that held the licenses. The two-speed Ireland runs on the assumption that nobody will check. Last week, somebody checked.